It was one of those quiet winter evenings when the wind carried a strange kind of silence. The sky had turned gray all day, and the weather forecast had warned that a snowstorm might be coming. But most people in town didn't think it would be serious. The streets were already empty, and a light snow had started falling just after sunset. At the edge of the small town stood an old farmhouse. Its paint had faded over the years, but it was still neat and warm inside. A kind old lady lived there alone. Her husband had passed away a few years earlier, and her children had moved to the city. She didn't complain about her quiet life. She had her little garden, her knitting, and a small radio that kept her company. On most evenings, she liked to sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the snowflakes fall on the empty road. That evening, she noticed the wind picking up speed. The snow was no longer soft and gentle. It was coming down harder, dancing wildly under the streetlight near her gate. She turned up the heater and whispered to herself, "It's going to be a long night." She walked to the kitchen to make herself some soup. While the pot simmered, she checked the candles, making sure they were ready in case the power went out. Then suddenly, through the thick sound of the wind, she heard something unusual. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the sound of a car. It was something deeper, louder, like the growl of engines. She moved closer to the window, pulling back the curtain. Through the wall of snow, she saw faint lights moving on the highway. There were several of them, bright white headlights and flashing red taillights cutting through the storm. The sound grew louder. It was a group of motorcycles. The old lady frowned in worry. "Oh dear," she said softly. The road was getting dangerous. The snow was sticking to the ground now, turning everything white. The bikers looked like they were struggling to stay balanced. A few of them had already slowed down, maybe looking for a place to stop. Without thinking twice, she put on her winter coat and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her face immediately, sharp and biting, but she waved her arms and shouted, "Hey, over here!" Her voice barely carried through the storm, but one of the bikers noticed her and pointed in her direction. Slowly, the others followed. 15 motorcycles rolled toward her small driveway, their engines echoing in the cold air. The riders were covered in snow, their jackets frozen and their faces hidden behind helmets. They stopped in front of her gate, confused about what to do next. The old lady didn't hesitate. "You can't stay out there," she shouted. "Come inside. You'll freeze to death." The men looked at each other. Some seemed unsure. They weren't used to strangers inviting them in, especially someone like her, an elderly woman standing alone in the snow. One of them took off his helmet and spoke. "Ma'am, we don't want to bother you." "We'll be fine," she shook her head. "You're not fine. I can see it. The storm's getting worse. Bring your bikes into the barn and come inside before you get sick." Her tone was firm, the kind that reminded people of their grandmother when she meant business. The men exchanged glances again, then nodded. A few of them pushed their bikes toward the old wooden barn beside the house. It took a while. The snow was thick and the wind made it hard to see. The lady held the lantern to light their way. Once the bikes were safely inside, she waved them toward the front door. "Come in now. I'll make something hot for you." The warmth of the house hit them like a gentle hug. They stepped inside, dripping snow onto the floor. The air smelled of soup and cinnamon. The lady quickly laid out old towels and told them to sit near the fire. They removed their gloves and helmets, revealing tired faces, some young, some middle-aged, all grateful to finally be out of the cold. One of the men smiled shyly. "You really didn't have to do this, ma'am. We could have slept by the road." "Nonsense," she said. "That road would have been your grave if I left you out there. Sit down and warm your hands." They did as they were told. The old lady moved about the kitchen, pouring hot soup into large bowls. The smell filled the room, and soon everyone was eating quietly, the storm still roaring outside. The house felt alive again, filled with laughter, voices, and the clinking of spoons. After dinner, the bikers began to relax. A few helped clean the dishes despite her protests. Others brought in logs for the fire. She noticed that they were polite, rough-looking maybe, but respectful. She asked them where they were headed. One said they had been traveling to a charity ride in a nearby town, but the snow caught them by surprise. The lady nodded thoughtfully. "My husband used to ride a motorcycle," she said with a soft smile. "He loved the open road. I never liked the noise, but I liked how happy it made him." Her words made them smile. They could tell she spoke with love. The storm outside grew louder. The wind whistled through the trees and the windows rattled now and then. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. The whole house fell into darkness. A few of the bikers reached for their flashlights, but the lady calmly lit a candle. The soft yellow light made the room glow warmly again. "Well," she said with a chuckle, "looks like it's just us and the fire tonight." They gathered around the fireplace, wrapping themselves in blankets she had brought from the closet. The men began sharing stories, funny ones, serious ones, and those about their travels. One of them told how he once rode from coast to coast just to see his daughter graduate. Another spoke about how riding was the only thing that helped him through tough times. The old lady listened closely, her eyes gentle and kind. She never interrupted. She just smiled, nodded, and laughed at the funny parts. At one point, one of the bikers said quietly, "Most people don't see us like this. They just think we're trouble." The lady looked at him and said softly, "People judge what they don't know. But I've learned that kindness shows up in all kinds of jackets." For a moment, the room went silent. The wind still howled outside, but inside there was peace. As the night went on, the warmth of the fire and the comfort of company made everyone forget the storm for a while. Some of the men stretched out on the floor, others on the couches. One even fell asleep sitting upright near the window. The lady covered each of them with a blanket before she went to her room, but she couldn't sleep right away. She lay there thinking about how strange the night had turned out. Just a few hours earlier, she had been alone, expecting nothing but silence and the sound of snow hitting her window. Now her house was full of laughter, life, and warmth. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. Meanwhile, in the living room, a few of the bikers were still awake, whispering among themselves. They couldn't stop talking about how unbelievable it was that a stranger had opened her door to them. One of them said, "You know, people cross the street when they see us. But this lady, she just smiled and told us to come in." "Yeah," another replied. "Makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe there's still good left in the world." Before long, even they fell asleep. The storm outside raged on through the night, but the little house stood firm. Inside, the fire burned low, casting soft shadows on the walls. The smell of wood smoke and warm soup still lingered in the air. By the time dawn began to lighten the sky, the storm had finally started to die down. Snow covered everything: the barn, the trees, the road, and even the motorcycles. It was a white, quiet world again. The lady stirred in her bed and smiled, remembering her unexpected guests. She didn't know it yet, but that night would change her life forever. For now, she only thought about breakfast. She got up, wrapped herself in her shawl, and walked to the kitchen. She could already hear the muffled sounds of boots and quiet laughter coming from the living room. The smell of coffee filled the air. The bikers were awake, grateful, and ready to help. The storm was over, but something warm had begun, something that would soon travel far beyond that little house at the edge of the road. The morning sun was just beginning to rise behind the white hills. The snow-covered ground sparkled softly as light touched it for the first time since the storm. Inside the old farmhouse, the smell of coffee and fresh bread drifted through the air. The house, which had been filled with silence for years, now hummed with life. The old lady moved quietly through the kitchen, wearing her thick wool sweater and slippers. She smiled as she listened to the laughter coming from the living room. The bikers had woken up early, careful not to make too much noise, but their deep voices carried through the small house. She peeked around the corner and saw them standing near the window, brushing snow off their jackets and boots. Some were already outside, clearing a path from the door to the barn. She couldn't help but feel proud. They looked like a small army of men determined to make themselves useful. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully. A few turned around and greeted her with warm smiles. "Morning, ma'am. We thought we'd help you dig out the driveway before we hit the road." She laughed softly. "You boys don't waste any time, do you? Come in and eat first. You'll need your strength." They hesitated for a moment, but the smell of the freshly baked bread won them over. Soon they were sitting around the small wooden table, their hands wrapped around steaming mugs of coffee. The old lady poured them more as she hummed an old tune from her radio days. "It's been a long time since I had a full table," she said quietly, almost to herself. One of the men looked up. "We're lucky you were here for us." "Most folks would have just locked their doors." She waved her hand. "Ah, nonsense. My husband used to say, if someone knocks on your door during a storm, it's because they need a bit of God's warmth." That's all I did, shared a little warmth. They all smiled, touched by her words. The room felt light and calm, but outside the snow still piled high against the fence. After breakfast, the bikers put on their gloves and jackets again. They went outside to shovel the driveway and clear the roof of snow. The lady tried to stop them, saying they'd done enough, but they wouldn't listen. "You gave us a home for the night," one of them said. "Let us give you something back." She stood by the porch watching them work. Their laughter echoed through the crisp air. The cold didn't seem to bother them as they lifted shovels and moved snow into neat piles. It reminded her of younger days, when her husband and sons would do the same after every winter storm. The sight made her eyes water, but it wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. When they finished, one of the bikers checked on their motorcycles in the barn. The engines were frozen stiff, the fuel thick from the cold. They decided to wait a bit longer before leaving. That gave them time to sit and talk again. The old lady made another pot of tea. She sat with them near the fire, and this time they asked her about her life. "I've lived here for almost 50 years, she said. "My husband built this house with his own hands. He was a mechanic and he loved engines. I used to tease him that he spent more time with his tools than with me." They laughed. One of the younger bikers leaned forward. "So he used to ride too?" "Oh, he did," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "Had an old blue motorcycle that he kept spotless. Every Sunday morning he'd polish it till it shone like the sky. We'd go for rides together sometimes, just down the country roads. I'd hold on tight and pretend not to be scared." "You weren't scared?" another asked playfully. "Terrified," she admitted with a grin. "But it was our little adventure." He said, "The road makes you feel alive. I never understood it back then. I think I do now." For a moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled softly, and snowflakes drifted past the window. The bikers seemed to understand something unspoken, a connection that had formed overnight. Then one of them said, "You know, you remind me of my grandma. She used to make us pancakes every Sunday before we rode out. She'd always say, 'Keep your head up and your heart kind.'" The lady smiled warmly. "Sounds like a wise woman." The rest of the day passed slowly. The sun came out fully, melting the ice on the roof and turning the snow into sparkling water drops. The bikers helped fix a few things around the house, tightened a loose door hinge, replaced a broken light bulb, and even repaired a small leak near the kitchen window. They insisted it was the least they could do. She made them a big pot of stew for lunch. The men ate heartily, thanking her after every bowl. They felt more like family now than strangers. It was strange how quickly the connection had formed. When they finally decided to leave, the old lady stood by the porch again. The road had cleared enough for them to ride, and the sun was shining bright over the snow. She handed them each a small paper bag with sandwiches and cookies she had made that morning. "You boys be careful on that road," she said. "And if another storm catches you, don't you hesitate to knock again." They promised they would. A few even hugged her before putting on their helmets. The engines started one by one, rumbling through the still air. The sound filled the valley, strong and deep. The old lady waved as the line of motorcycles slowly pulled out of her driveway and disappeared down the road. When they were gone, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't lonely anymore, it was peaceful. She looked around her living room, still scattered with blankets and mugs. She smiled, shaking her head. "What a night," she whispered. She spent the rest of the day cleaning up, humming to herself. Every now and then, she'd glance out the window, half expecting to see them riding back up the road. The house felt a little emptier, but her heart felt full. That night, she sat by the fireplace again with a cup of tea. The storm had left a beautiful world behind, a white blanket that made everything look pure and new. She thought about those bikers, about how unexpected kindness had brought so much warmth into her home. She didn't know that her act of kindness had already started to travel far beyond her little town. One of the bikers had posted about the night on social media before they left, telling the story of the sweet old lady who opened her home to 15 freezing riders. He didn't use her name or address, but the story was so heartfelt that it began spreading quickly. People shared it, commented on it, and even wrote messages of gratitude saying the world needed more people like her. But she had no idea any of that was happening. She didn't use the internet much. All she knew was that she had done what she believed was right. That night she said a quiet prayer for the men she had met, asking that they ride safely wherever they went. The next morning she woke up early as usual. The air was calm, the snow glistening under the sunrise. She fed the birds outside her window and then sat down with her knitting. It was just another peaceful morning, or so she thought. As the hours passed, she began hearing a faint sound in the distance. At first she thought it was the wind again, but then it grew louder, steady, rhythmic like a deep rolling thunder. She frowned and looked out the window. Far down the road she saw something glinting in the sun. Then she saw another and another. She stood up, her heart beating faster. The sound was unmistakable now. Motorcycles, many of them. She opened her front door and stepped outside, shading her eyes from the light. Her jaw dropped. There were motorcycles, dozens of them, coming down the road toward her house. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. But that moment, that sight, was just the beginning of something she could never have imagined. The sound grew louder with every second. The old lady stood frozen on her porch, her hand gripping the railing as the rumble of engines filled the air. It was like a rolling wave of thunder, echoing through the quiet countryside. She squinted toward the road, unsure if she was dreaming. As the first motorcycles came into view, she gasped. One by one, bikes appeared around the bend, 10, 20, then 50, and more after that. Their chrome glimmered under the winter sun. The sound was powerful but not frightening. It was steady and strong like a heartbeat. Her heart raced. She stepped down from the porch and walked a few feet into the snow, watching in disbelief. The riders slowed down as they approached her house, careful not to startle her. They parked neatly along the road, the line stretching almost the entire length of her fence. When the engines finally turned off, the world went quiet again, except for the crunch of boots on snow. A few bikers took off their helmets and waved. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, walked toward her with a small smile. "Morning, ma'am," he said warmly. "Hope we didn't scare you." She shook her head slowly. "Scare me? I just don't understand what all this is." He looked around, gesturing to the long line of motorcycles. "We heard about what you did. The guys you helped during the storm told everyone in the riding community. We came to say thank you." The lady blinked, her lips trembling with surprise. "All of this and for me?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Your kindness meant a lot to them. And to us, too. People don't open their doors to strangers anymore, especially not to folks like us. But you did. You reminded us what kindness looks like." She didn't know what to say. Her eyes watered as she looked at all the faces staring back at her. Men and women of all ages, each smiling with respect and gratitude. She could feel the warmth in their eyes even through the cold morning air. Before she could speak, another biker stepped forward holding a bouquet of bright yellow flowers. "We brought these for you," he said, "and some other things too." From the back of one of the trucks they began unloading boxes and bags. Some had groceries, others tools and supplies. One even had new blankets. The old lady covered her mouth in shock. "Oh, dear heavens. You shouldn't have done all this." "We wanted to," another rider said. "You gave 15 strangers a home when the world froze over. That's something we'll never forget." She tried to keep her composure, but tears started to roll down her cheeks. "I didn't do it for anything in return," she whispered. "They just looked so cold. I couldn't let them freeze out there." "That's exactly why we're here," the first man said with a grin. "You did it because it was right. That's rare these days." They spent the rest of the morning talking and laughing. Some of the bikers helped clear the rest of the snow from her yard. Others repaired the old wooden fence that had been damaged by the storm. A few fixed the loose shingles on her barn roof. It was like a small community working together, each person finding something useful to do. The lady stood in the middle of it all, smiling through her tears. "My husband would have loved this," she said softly to one of them. "He used to say a good engine can bring people together." "Well, looks like he was right," the biker replied with a chuckle. Someone brought out a portable grill and started cooking hot dogs and coffee. The smell filled the cold air, mixing with laughter and the sound of music from a small speaker. The quiet little farmhouse had become the center of life again. Neighbors peeked through their windows from down the road, surprised to see so many bikes lined up outside the old lady's house. At one point, a local news van drove by and stopped. The reporter got out, curious about what was happening. When they learned the story, they asked if they could film a short segment. The old lady hesitated at first. She didn't like attention, but the bikers encouraged her. "People should hear about what kindness looks like," one of them said. "Maybe it'll inspire others too." The camera rolled as she stood on her porch with a shy smile surrounded by her new friends. The reporter asked her, "What made you open your door that night when most people would have been too afraid?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Fear doesn't keep you warm," she said softly. "But kindness does. I saw people in trouble and I did what anyone should do. I just opened the door." Her simple words touched everyone listening. Even the reporter looked moved. The story aired that evening on the local news, and within hours, people from nearby towns began talking about it. Messages poured in, some offering help, others simply expressing gratitude for reminding them that goodness still existed. Back at the farmhouse, the bikers stayed for hours. They shared stories, took photos, and even promised to visit her again in the spring when the flowers would bloom. Before leaving, the tall man who had spoken earlier handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. He smiled gently. "It's just a small thank you from all of us." Some of the guys chipped in. "We wanted to make sure you had what you need to keep this place comfortable." She shook her head quickly. "Oh, no. I can't accept money. You've already done too much." "It's not about money," he said. "It's about family. You're part of ours now." She hesitated, looking at the envelope, then at all the faces watching her. Finally, she smiled and nodded. "All right then. But you have to promise to stop by again. No disappearing. You've got yourself a deal," the man said, grinning. When they finally got ready to leave, the engines started up again one by one, filling the air with a deep rumble. But this time it wasn't just noise, it was a song of respect. The riders lined up neatly, forming 2 long rows on either side of her driveway. As they rode off, they all lifted their hands in salute. She stood on her porch waving until the very last one disappeared over the hill. Then she looked down at the envelope in her hands and went back inside. Sitting by the fire, she opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "You reminded us what real strength looks like. It's not in engines or speed, it's in kindness. Thank you for being our light in the storm." Beneath the note was some money, more than she had expected, but it wasn't the money that made her cry. It was the words. They were simple, honest, and full of heart. She placed the note on the mantel beside a photo of her late husband. "You'd be proud of this," she whispered with a smile. Over the next few days, her life slowly returned to normal, but it didn't feel quite the same. She started receiving letters from people she'd never met. Some sent postcards, others wrote emails, with the help of a neighbor who printed them for her. They all shared the same message. "Thank you for reminding us that kindness still matters." She didn't see herself as a hero. She was just someone who did what she thought was right. But deep down, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, a feeling that she was part of something much bigger. Every evening, she would sit by her window again. But now when she looked at the road, she saw more than empty snow and silence. She saw memories of headlights cutting through the storm, the sound of engines, the laughter, and the warmth that had filled her home. And sometimes, when the wind was quiet and the night was still, she thought she could hear that familiar rumble in the distance, a reminder that those she helped had never really left. The world outside her little house had changed because of one small act of kindness. And in her heart she knew something simple but powerful. One open door can light up 100 hearts. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that morning never faded. The old lady still couldn't believe it had really happened. Sometimes, when she looked out the window, she half expected to see that long line of motorcycles parked outside again. The sound of their engines still echoed in her mind, a sound she had come to associate with kindness rather than noise. The story of what she had done spread far and wide. The news report had been shared across the internet, and people from all over the country started talking about her. Letters began arriving almost every day, handwritten ones, printed ones, and even some that came with small gifts. Some people sent scarves and mittens. Others sent notes that simply said, "Thank you for reminding us to care." The postman, who used to drop only a few bills in her mailbox, now greeted her with a grin. "You've become quite the celebrity," he teased one morning as he handed her a thick bundle of envelopes. She laughed softly. "Oh, I didn't mean to. I just opened a door." "Well," the postman said with a smile, "looks like that door opened a lot of hearts too." Despite all the attention, her life stayed humble. She still made her tea the same way every morning, still fed the birds by her window, and still walked to the end of the driveway to check the mail. But something inside her had changed. The loneliness that used to hang over her home had lifted. Her days were filled with warmth, not from a heater or the fireplace, but from the kindness she now felt all around her. A few weeks later, on a chilly Saturday morning, she heard the sound again, the deep rumble of motorcycles. Her heart jumped and she rushed to the window. Down the road, a familiar sight appeared. About a dozen bikes were heading her way. She hurried to the porch, her face lighting up as she recognized a few of them. When they parked in front of her house, she waved excitedly. "You came back," she called out. One of the riders took off his helmet, smiling broadly. "Of course we did. We promised, didn't we?" They had come to check on her, to make sure she was doing all right after the storm. But they had brought more than just themselves. In the back of one of the trucks there were boxes of lumber, paint, and new tools. "What's all this?" she asked in surprise. "Well," one of them said, scratching his beard, "some of the guys noticed your porch steps were getting a little weak. We figured we'd come fix them for you, maybe give the house a new coat of paint while we're at it." She tried to protest, but they wouldn't hear it. Within an hour, the quiet property turned into a small worksite. Some bikers sanded down old wood, others repainted the shutters, and a few repaired the barn roof that had been damaged during the storm. The sound of hammers, drills, and laughter filled the air. The lady sat in her old rocking chair on the porch watching them work. Her heart swelled with gratitude. Every now and then, one of them would bring her tea or ask for her opinion on what color to paint the fence. They made sure she was involved in every decision, treating her like family. When lunchtime came, she insisted on cooking for them. "If you're going to fix my house," she said with a playful tone, "you're at least going to eat properly." They laughed, but they didn't argue. She made a big pot of soup and grilled sandwiches for everyone. The bikers gathered around in the yard, eating, talking, and joking like old friends. As they sat together, she told them more about her life. She spoke about her late husband, about how they had built the house piece by piece when they were young. She shared stories about her children and how much she missed the sound of company around her. One of the bikers listened quietly and then said, "You'll never have to feel alone again." "You've got us now," she smiled, her eyes shining. "You boys are something special. I can't believe how much good has come from one stormy night." The work continued over the next few weekends. The bikers came back again and again, each time bringing more help. They fixed the fence, repaired the back porch, and even planted new flowers in her garden. Neighbors who used to keep to themselves began stopping by to watch. Some offered to help, bringing pies, tools, and coffee. What started as a small act of kindness had turned into something much bigger. It had brought the whole community together. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, she stood in her yard looking at her freshly painted house. The walls shone in a warm shade of cream, and the porch looked brand new. She turned to the bikers and said softly, "It's perfect. My husband would have loved this. He always said this house was built with love, and now it's full of it again." That night, the bikers stayed for dinner. They lit a small bonfire in her yard and sat around it, sharing stories just like they had during the storm. The air was cool, but the fire crackled warmly and the laughter carried far into the night. At one point, one of the bikers asked her, "Do you ever think about moving closer to your kids?" She shook her head with a gentle smile. "They have their lives and I have mine. I'm happy here. Besides, I think I've got plenty of family close by now." The man grinned. "You sure do, ma'am." As the night went on, a few of them took out guitars and played soft tunes. The old lady clapped along, her face glowing in the firelight. It was one of those simple, unforgettable evenings, no big plans, no noise, just people enjoying being together. When they finally said goodbye that night, she hugged each of them. "You've done more for me than you'll ever know," she told them. One of them smiled and replied, "You did the same for us first." Over the next few months, the bikers kept their promise. They visited often, sometimes bringing their families, sometimes just dropping by to check in. Her home became a place of warmth and gathering, a place where stories were shared and friendships grew. Neighbors who had once been distant started talking more, too. They'd wave when they passed her gate, sometimes even stop for tea. It was as if kindness had spread from that one act like ripples in a pond. One cold evening, as the lady sat by the window knitting, she saw headlights coming down the road again. She smiled, expecting to see the familiar bikers. But when she opened the door, she found a young couple standing there instead, shivering in the cold. Their car had broken down a few miles away. Without hesitation, she said the same words she had said months earlier. Come in before you freeze, the fire's warm. They followed her inside, grateful and surprised. She gave them tea, blankets, and a place to rest while they waited for help. As they sat by the fire, the young woman noticed the photographs on the mantel. Pictures of bikers, flowers, and smiling faces. Looks like you have quite a family, she said. The old lady smiled softly. Yes, she said. A big one. And it all started because of a snowstorm. The couple looked at her curiously, and she began telling them the story, how a simple decision to open her door had changed everything. Her voice was calm but full of emotion, and by the time she finished, they were both smiling. When the tow truck arrived later that night, the couple hugged her before they left. Thank you, they said. You've got the kindest heart we've ever met. After they drove away, the old lady stood by the window watching the taillights disappear into the distance. The night was quiet again, but inside, her heart was full. She realized something beautiful. Kindness never really ends. It moves, from one person to another, passing through lives like a flame that never goes out. She sat down in her chair and whispered to herself, maybe that's what the world needs, more open doors. The fire flickered gently beside her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the chill of winter. She only felt warmth, the kind that stays, the kind that spreads, and the kind that keeps growing long after the snow has melted. Winter slowly faded away, and with spring came a soft warmth that touched everything. The snow that once covered the little town had melted, revealing green grass and blooming flowers. The old lady's garden was full of life again. Birds chirped around her window and the air smelled fresh and clean. But this time, she didn't feel the quietness she used to dread. There was always someone dropping by, always a voice at her door, always a sign that she was no longer alone. One bright morning, she sat on her porch sipping tea when she heard the sound of motorcycles again. The deep hum of engines rolled through the air and a smile spread across her face before she even saw them. Down the road, a long line of bikes appeared, more than before. She stood up, shading her eyes as the sunlight glinted off the chrome. By the time they parked outside her home, she was already laughing with delight. There must have been 50 or 60 bikes this time, men and women of all ages. Some she recognized, others she didn't. They waved and greeted her warmly, calling, "Out, we told you we'd come back," she laughed, shaking her head. "You never said it would be a whole army." A man stepped forward holding a bunch of flowers. "These are for you," he said, "from all of us." She took them gently, tears welling in her eyes. "You people never stop surprising me." The bikers explained that they had been planning something special for her. News of her kindness had continued to spread, and many bikers from neighboring towns had heard her story. They wanted to meet the woman who had taken care of their friends that snowy night. So they decided to ride together to her house to thank her in person. Soon her yard was full of laughter and stories again. Some bikers helped set up tables and chairs, others unpacked food from their trucks. One group started a barbecue, while a few played music on small speakers. The scene was full of life, people eating, talking, and smiling. The air smelled of grilled food and spring flowers. She moved among them like a grandmother surrounded by her children. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to thank her, to hear her side of the story. But she kept saying the same thing with a humble smile. "I just did what anyone would do. You were cold, tired, and needed a place to rest. That's all." Yet deep down, everyone knew it wasn't something everyone would have done. She had chosen kindness when it was inconvenient. She had chosen warmth when the world outside was freezing. And that choice had started a chain of goodness that hadn't stopped spreading. After everyone had eaten, one of the bikers stood up on a chair and called for attention. "All right, everyone, listen up," he shouted over the chatter. "We've got something to show our appreciation for the lady who gave us more than shelter that night. She gave us hope." He motioned to a few others, and they brought forward a large wooden plaque. It was beautifully carved, with golden letters that read, "In honor of a heart that opened its door, thank you for your kindness." Her eyes filled with tears as she read the words. The crowd clapped and cheered. One of the bikers gently placed the plaque on her porch wall, right beside the front door. She touched the smooth wood with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I'll treasure it always." Then another biker stepped forward with a small box in his hands. "And there's one more thing," he said, smiling. Inside the box was a keychain shaped like a small silver motorcycle, engraved with her initials. "Now you're officially one of us," he said proudly. "Honorary member." The crowd erupted in cheers again, laughing and whistling. Someone handed her a leather jacket, small, custom-made, with her name stitched across the back. "Oh my goodness," she said, laughing through tears. "You people are going to make me cry." "That's the plan," someone shouted playfully. The rest of the day felt like a celebration of life itself. She hadn't seen that much joy in one place for years. People shared stories, sang songs, and told her about the lives they led, the roads they traveled, the places they'd seen, the struggles they'd faced. And every time someone finished speaking, she listened with genuine care, as if their words truly mattered. Late in the afternoon, she sat quietly on her porch again, watching the scene unfold before her. Some of the bikers were helping kids from the neighborhood take photos on their bikes. Others were cleaning up, and a few were just sitting on the grass talking about life. A young man came up to her and said softly, "You know, ma'am, before that night, a lot of us didn't really believe people like you existed anymore. The world feels different now. Better, somehow." She looked at him kindly. "It's not me," she said. "It's all of you. You came back. You shared kindness, too. That's how it works. It keeps moving." The young man nodded thoughtfully, and for a while, they just sat there in silence, listening to the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. As the sun began to set, the bikers started preparing to leave. Engines roared to life one by one, filling the air with a deep, steady hum. She stood by the porch waving as each of them passed by, her eyes glistening with emotion. Before leaving, one of them leaned down and said, "We'll be back next year, same time." She smiled warmly. "I'll keep the kettle ready." When the last bike disappeared down the road, the quiet returned, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet. She looked at the plaque on her wall, the flowers on her table, and the jacket hanging by the door. Her home, once lonely and cold, now felt like the heart of something much bigger. Over the following months, more letters came, not just from bikers, but from people who had heard about her story online or through friends. Some wrote to tell her that they had decided to open their doors to others in need, inspired by what she had done. Others shared how her kindness had reminded them to call their parents, check on a neighbor, or forgive someone they had been angry with. She read every letter carefully, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. She kept them all in a small wooden box she labeled the Good People box. Every time she felt lonely, she opened it and read a few. It reminded her that even the smallest act of kindness could travel far beyond what anyone could imagine. A year passed, and when winter returned, she found herself smiling at the first sign of snow. The world outside turned white once again, but this time she didn't feel worried or alone. She knew what the snow could bring, not just cold, but connection. Sure enough, one morning she heard the familiar rumble again. She looked out the window and gasped. The road in front of her home was lined with motorcycles, more than ever before. Dozens upon dozens stretching down the street. It looked almost endless. When she stepped outside, the bikers greeted her with cheers. Some held signs that said, "Thank you," and "Kindness lives here." Others waved happily, their breath misting in the cold air. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked at them all. "You really came back," she said softly. A voice from the crowd shouted, "We told you we would." And this time, it wasn't just the bikers. Families from town had joined too, people who had been touched by her story. The local mayor came, reporters came, even children who had seen her story online came with their parents. It wasn't Jay. Someone handed her a microphone and asked if she wanted to say a few words. She hesitated at first, but then smiled and began to speak. "I never thought one night would lead to all this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I just saw people who needed help and I had a warm house. That's all it was. But maybe that's what the world needs more of. Just a little warmth when things get cold. The crowd went quiet, listening closely. Kindness doesn't cost anything, she continued, but it gives everything. It makes strangers into friends and turns a storm into a story worth remembering. The applause that followed was loud and long, echoing through the chilly air. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the old lady looked around at the sea of smiling faces and roaring engines. For a moment she thought back to that snowy night, the fear, the uncertainty, the cold, and she realized it had all led here. When the bikers revved their engines in unison, it sounded like thunder. But to her, it was the sweetest music in the world. She stood there waving, her heart full, her spirit at peace. That night, as she sat by her fireplace, she whispered to herself, maybe kindness really is the only thing that never freezes. And outside her home, in the fading snowlight, the wooden plaque gleamed softly, a symbol of what happens when one person decides to open a door and the whole world walks through.